Right. Kirsten Lord, you have over 20 years leadership experience in people and culture, formerly HR director at Bulgaria Hotel, former director of people and change for BRE, which is Building Research Establishment. You're currently the chief people and culture officer at Corinthia Hotels. Thank you so much for joining me on Decoding Calm in 15 minutes-ish. I say ish, this is
You
before we
are
came on, we
most
agreed 15-minute
welcome.
challenge. So first question, and if anybody's tuned into this podcast, it's the first time they've heard it. This podcast is really to try and get inside of the mind of senior leaders, just to understand what makes them tick. I've always been fascinated. How do a certain percentage of the population deal with the most stressful jobs in the world? How do you sleep at night? How do you not let the stress overwhelm you? What coping mechanisms do you have? And can you share any of this stuff with us? So first question, would you describe yourself as a calm person, Kirsten?
I'd say no,
Would you?
but yeah, others do describe me as
Interesting.
being calm.
Right.
I actually checked with my partner this morning.
Did you?
I said, yeah, do you describe me as calm? Um, but what I do think has happened over the last probably 10, 15 years is I am much better at perspective.
Right.
So, whereas, perhaps in your formative years, everything becomes an issue. And I think, particularly in the profession that I've chosen, the people and the impact of people, and particularly the impact of work on people and the asks that employers do give to their people.
Yeah.
I think that is something that played really quite heavily on my mind in formative years in that professional kind of sense. So I think maybe I've become a lot better at presenting a calmness
Right.
um, of kind of working through, I don't know, what potentially could be a catastrophic situation or something that perhaps would have kept me awake at night. For example, a mass redundancy program,
Yeah.
for example. And I also think what helps me to put things into perspective is a real understanding of how I will approach these types of activities, and equally how I coach and develop my teams to actually approach them as well.
Right.
So yeah, I think it's interesting that other people would describe me as being that voice of reason, that voice of calm, and perhaps I've just learned to get through all the inner kind of angst before presenting myself as such.
But that's great though. I think that shows a lot of self-awareness. Because I think the worst leaders. I read a brilliant thing the other day. I'm a massive dog lover. And I read a great thing, one of the great dog trainers said, humans are the only species that will follow an unstable pack leader. And he was relating it specifically to dogs. He said dogs won't. They
Yeah,
just won't. Dogs won't be
yeah,
ruled by a fearful pack leader. If they sense any uncertain dogs, it's all about energy. Obviously, there's no words. And with
yeah,
words, we can really manipulate people. And he said humans will follow an unstable pack leader, but dogs won't. And I think
yeah,
the greatest leaders I see, and there are plenty of bad examples, I won't name any, especially in politics, are the ones that have got the most self-awareness. I think if you've got the self-awareness to manage your own emotion or at least see it and not necessarily pass it on, then you become that leader who can present in a calm way and be dealing with a mass problem, a huge critical incident. M&S springs to mind whenever people listen to this. M&S just been kind of had this huge cyber attack, and not pass that stress on. I think that's such an important point as a leader. What did your partner say when you said, "Am I calm?"
said yes. Yeah, and I think he said yes because quite often I know that I automatically go into that coaching role with him.
Right.
So if he's having some kind of it's not a crisis necessarily, but a challenge that is wanting to work through, I automatically go, okay, let's break this down. What are the bits that you can actually control?
Right.
What's your sphere of influence? What are the bits that you can't control? And actually encouraging people to take ownership of things as well. And so take ownership for it. You can't necessarily control other people's behavior. You can
Mm.
choose how you respond to it,
Mm.
for example. And that self-awareness piece, it probably is really born out of, you probably, we're talking about another podcast that I did, and the best piece of advice that I was given, which is now a little bit of a catchphrase, I think, but it is that, when there's a reason why when you're on an aircraft, in the safety briefing, you are briefed to put your own oxygen mask on first before trying to help others. And, doing that and putting that metaphorical oxygen mask on is something that I really do advocate for. And that is probably born out of me actually having what I would describe as a breakdown. I have a deep rooted sense of responsibility. I'm a great believer in strengths, and I'm an advocate and a strengths based coach, and that self awareness piece, understanding how that responsibility shows up in me, which effectively is putting everyone and everything before my own needs,
Right.
needs to be dialed down.
Yeah.
And if it isn't dialed down, I'm not used to anybody, because
Yes.
that's when I start to go into this kind of overdrive where perspective is kind of lost.
Yes, I can really relate to that. And I was listening to, we were talking about Sarah Marshall before we came on, weren't we?
Yeah.
And I listened to her on another podcast the other day, and she said her therapist said to her, stop setting yourself on fire to keep everybody else warm.
Yeah.
And I love
All of
that.
those
That's
types of
so, I can so relate to that. So that makes me really curious then, because one of the things that I thought stopped me from being or wanting to be a real senior leader in any organization was over empathy, was a sense that I'd worry about. One of the things I'd worry about too much would be everybody else. And this desire for me to fix, I mean, the role I'm in now, I really have to dial it down like you do. I want to fix everybody. I want to help everybody. I want to make everybody happy. I want to take all their stress away. And you can't do that. Like you can, there's only so much you can help people. People ultimately have to help themselves, right?
do. But this is where, particularly in business, I think the culture plays a huge part of this, because in order to develop great leaders, then for me, developing people to have that real human approach to managing people and leading people, is something that, again, is so important for me, so that it isn't just, the burden, for want of a better word,
Mm.
the burden of empathy doesn't sit with those who are automatically and inherently empaths, or shouldn't.
Yeah.
So the idea of having a culture in which everyone can thrive means that you have to be very reliant on the hundreds of other leaders that you have in a business, that they take this kind of stuff really seriously,
Yeah.
so that it, as I say, it doesn't just reside with one or two people who have that inherent ability to be empathetic.
Yeah. Tell me about specific things you do or don't do to manage your stress levels to perform at a high level. Are there any sort of non-negotiables? Do you always, well, I don't want to put any words into your mouth, kind of things I'm thinking, but would be, do you always take a lunch break, or do you always do a workout, or do you always take your dog for a walk? Is there anything that you've really, over the years, you've thought, I've got to have these spaces in my day if I'm going to perform at the top level?
Mm.
What kind of things do you have? What rituals do you have?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If I don't work out, then I'm no good to anybody. I,
Right.
I feel it, myself. Those physical, endorphins that you get from working out, absolutely. So, and again, I know another phrase is around that kind of work-life balance, and so some people find it easier to compartmentalize.
Mm.
I sometimes I think, particularly working in a 24/7 business, having that level of compartmentalization isn't necessarily realistic.
Yeah.
What I do try and protect are things like holiday.
Right.
time. And by doing that, I need to make sure I've done a really great handover with the team, giving them heads up on things that may or may not be dropping in, whilst I'm away, making sure that the team feel empowered enough to actually make decisions when I'm not
Yes.
around, and giving them the security that if a decision is made and it turns out to be an incorrect decision, you've still made that decision. Let's learn from that, for example. So knowing that the team have that level of security gives me also the confidence to kind of go off and leave them,
Yeah.
back to that perspective. We are not, nothing that we would make a decision on would or could, impact someone's life so significantly in the space of what, a week or
Yeah.
2 weeks.
Yeah.
It's so that's a kind of a non-negotiable, which again, I have to say in hospitality is not always the case.
Mm.
Um, but it's back to that. I think people, when there are things like, 24/7 and people going, can we jump on a call because it's New York at whatever time or what have you? I think there's a difference between going, yeah, absolutely. When you are in the flow, you're enjoying what it is that you do, you understand, there is a different time zone, but equally you understand that there's a give and take.
Mm.
So although I might be working until, 9 o'clock one evening, I know that on other evenings, no one's going to bat an eyelid if actually I'm just taking myself offline at 3 or 4 or, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
And so I think that's the difference. It's the environment, isn't it? I think if people are actually enjoying and getting energy from their work and really kind of enjoying it, it is very different from people going, this is my space and this is my time and this is what I'm going to give to you,
Mm.
my employer.
Yeah. That's great. And I can really sense, because some people that do that fixed, I'm uncontactable, I'm away, they'll still spend the entire time worrying about what's happening back there. So even though they're protecting that time on the face of it, underneath, they're not really switching off. Whereas if
Yeah.
you've put stuff in place where you say, look, if you make the decision, you made the decision, I'll back it, even if it's the wrong one. I empower you to do this. Here's what's coming. All the good things you said there. Then I imagine you can go away and think, well, I've done everything. It's what is now, isn't it? Ultimately, there's got to be a point where you say it is what it is.
Yeah.
We're not saving lives here. Ultimately, we're providing an amazing service and it's high end hospitality.
Yeah.
But some perspective, because I was saying to you before we came on, I just work with the senior leaders at the Broadwick Soho, which is obviously a 5-star 24-hour
Yeah.
operation. And I've got a brand new actually appreciation for how much goes into running a place like that. Oh, because on the surface, when you go in as a client, it's beautiful. Everything's serene, service is incredible, everything's pristine. There's not a cushion out of place. It smells brilliant. The food's great, the bar's great. And but behind the scenes, it's like, oh my God, there's so much goes into this. And so
It's,
I really feel what's involved in doing what you do.
yeah. And I think this is where you need to be able to rely on your other peers as well. So
Mm,
often I'll ask one of the other senior leaders to just keep an eye on my team.
right.
If they want to bounce some ideas around, if there's a bit of a tricky kind of topic that or thorny kind of something that comes in, that they would usually go, Kirsten, can I just get your take on what I'm planning on doing? Would you mind whilst I'm out being that sounding board
Yeah.
for them?
Yeah.
And again, I think not only does that give the team some comfort, but it gives your peers a little bit more insight into some of the stuff that you handle on a daily basis,
Yeah. What's the highest stakes situation you've been in? And most importantly, how did you get through it?
Mm. I laugh at this one. I've been really thinking about this one, and this is where again I don't want to give such a verbose, given that we're 15 minutes ish. Um, it was when, and again, usually back to the when things impact people.
Mm,
I think that leaders have such a responsibility to do the right thing with people. So I'd say the highest stakes situation that I've been in for a number of reasons was a TUPE, which is Transfer of Undertakings and Protection of Employment program that I delivered between Vodafone and a company called Unipart Technology Logistics. Um, it was high stakes because, unbeknown to me, when I took the role, talk about due diligence, I blindly followed a leader who I'd worked with previously, who called me and said, "I've got a great job for you," which I knew usually meant it's something I don't really want to do.
Yeah.
Or, but equally, had such a great time working with him previously that I was like, yeah, of course I'll come on.
Right.
So this was about to impact about 1,000 people. It involved, potentially moving people geographically. UTL was about to become the sole logistics provider for Vodafone in the UK, with a view to, perhaps, taking this model through to Europe. It involved bringing in people from that did mobile phone repairs, bringing them into an organisation, asking people to relocate their lives, really wanting to kind of protect the skill sets that they had, and all of this. And to top it all off, it had made the national news,
Oh, wow.
given the scale of potential redundancies that were about to take place if we hadn't managed to,
Right.
do all of this. Yeah, so I'd say that was quite high stakes,
When was
really.
this? When was this, Kirsten?
Oh my God, this was, God, it was over 20 years ago,
Right.
I would say, well over 20 years ago now. Yeah, and actually the point at when I actually realised it was high stakes um, was after my boss Jed had said to me, "I think it's time you go up to Newark now and get yourself around the negotiating table with Vodafone." And as I was driving up the M1 to take myself to Newark, on the national news came, Vodafone announced potential redundancies from its, site in Newark.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So yeah, so that was pretty high stakes.
How did you
And
manage that?
again,
How was your sleep during that period? How were your stress levels during that period? And what did you do to look after yourself?
well, the other high stake about it as well was that there was an existing member of the HR team who had applied for the role that I took as well. So there was
Right.
scrutiny in relation to, well, why is she going to be doing it
Oh, wow.
any better than I was, from my own team as well. Um, I think that's where the strength of the people that you are working with and for come into play. So back to that, partly took the role because yes, it was really interesting, but equally, I had some comfort in working for somebody who I knew had similar set of values, would want to do it the right way. We'd worked together at Hilton, so again, has that that hospitality kind of people centric approach to these types of initiatives. We'd bought and sold different hotels and had gone through similar exercises. So I knew that I'd have the backing of him, that when
Right.
push came to shove, what it might, say in the legal kind of parameters, requirements, contractual terms, and what have you, if that wasn't going to benefit an individual, then I knew I'd have his backing to kind of go, right, this is what the legalities of it is. However, let me put forward a more pragmatic kind of solution over some of this stuff. So I had that comfort, if you will. The other thing that really helped me, and she probably won't even realize this, is one of the HR business partners who was in my team, um, gave me some feedback quite early on about the difference in my approach. So, for example, when we were sitting in these one-to-one consultations, bearing in mind, this is a massive impact it's having on people. They've got kids at schools and we're asking them to move over 100 miles away, and, all of this was the care and attention that I took in those conversations, and the detail that I gleaned from them, and what was important to them, and what was worrying them, and the speed at which I then went back to them. Because back to that being empathetic, I don't want people lying awake at night
Yeah.
worrying
Yeah.
that they've got the kids settled in a particular school. And so back to that pragmatic solution, me going, is there any different way that we could retain their skills? Do they have to actually move, or is it that actually all we're really going to need them to help us with is the kind of the lift and the shift and the drop of moving the operation from here to here? Could that be for the length of actually the project? And then could it be that actually when it's into business as usual, they don't actually physically need to be in and around where we're about to be sited, so it was things like that. And that really helped me think, because I'd gone from Hilton. I'd been there for 8 years in the formative years, and yes, had delivered some of this stuff, but I knew the culture, I knew the ins and outs of the operation, into technology logistics, of which I knew not a lot. But what I do know is how to help people through these awful
I can sense
situations, that can sometimes be really awful situations.
I can sense that. That's a huge skill. We need more people like you.
Think in these situations, quite often there are HR practitioners that will look at names on a spreadsheet and look at roles and kind of go, actually, we just need to move this role into this other area. But behind that role and that job title sits a person who might be a father or a mother or caring for parents, or so let's understand who sits behind that role. And then let's make a blended decision between what's the best for the business and what's the best for this person.
Yeah, perfect. I had a lot of bosses. I was in IBM for 28 years and I had a lot of bosses. And my best boss was he was my boss twice, and he actually was my boss when they made me redundant in 2020. And he was such a great boss. He was honest, he was empathic. Very similar to you. He came into my head when you were talking, and I thought, even though he had to make me redundant, and I've spoken very publicly about how little IBM gave me redundancy-wise, 28 years and £12,000 is statutory minimum. So on the face of it, I had quite a few reasons to be a bit angry and a bit bitter at IBM, and I'd given the best years of my life in many ways. But going through it with Dave, my boss at that time, it sucked. He actually lost his job at the same time too. But how he was managing that situation made such a difference to me. And you can do something. You can make someone redundant in a nice way, so to speak, and they can feel okay about it. And I still see him every year. He lives up near Liverpool. I'm down in Portsmouth. We're miles apart, but a few of us, we all meet. We go camping once a year. We're good friends. I bear no grudges. He's a great guy, and it can be done the right way, can't it? Even the tough things.
Absolutely. And that's what I mean about great leaders.
Yeah.
It can't and shouldn't just be your people team that have this behavioral skill.
Yeah.
Your behavioral skills, as I said in the podcast with Sarah, have much more impact the further up the status in an organization you go than your technical abilities. Much more.
Yes. I'm going to go to the quick fire questions. Morning or an evening person?
Morning.
Everyone says morning. Every senior leader says morning. Is there something in the water you drink? Everybody's like, I'm up early, I'm at them. You seem to have this energy that sort of, emails or phone calls?
Phone calls.
Favorite food?
Oh, anything that Russ cooks. He's a chef, so.
Oh, is he? Oh, ideal. Favorite book?
To Kill a Mockingbird.
Nice.
It's the only book I've ever read more than once.
Oh, is it?
Mm.
Nice.
Yeah.
Guilty pleasure?
It's probably something like with food. I really, I try and be all healthy and what have you, but I love really bad food for you, like frazzles, like those crisps that are just.
I thought you were going to say pork crackling then.
Oh no, I can't.
No? Oh, okay.
Like the hairs that you find.
You don't want the hairy bits.
No. So things like frazzles and stuff like that.
Yeah. I love crisps. Last question: if you could invite anyone over for dinner, alive or dead, who would it be? You can have more than one if you want, but who would it?
Well, do you know, I think any of my family who are no longer with us. And when I think about the elders, I think about my grandparents
Mm,
and my great aunts and uncles. And I really wish I'd spent more time understanding their life and my heritage and
yeah,
what they went through. So I would love to have them back just for an evening to kind of understand it all much better. I think it's things like thinking about, VE Day, and I was thinking, oh my God, what was it like for
yeah,
them?
yeah.
Yeah.
I saw
So
it. I
that's who.
like that. Most people come up with celebrities, don't they, or famous people? So I like your answer. I just said just very quickly. I saw a Jimmy Carr clip this morning. He said 50 years ago. One of the things he tries to practice is gratitude a little bit. And he said,
Mm.
he said as recently. I don't know. I haven't checked it, but he said as recently as 50 years ago, people weren't even having hot showers. And is that right? Does that sounds too recent, doesn't it? But he was saying, we live in this. We're in the top sort of percentile. We're so lucky to live these days. Children aren't dying before the age of 1 like they used to. The medicine's so much better. We've got access to food. We've got access to what he said. But the sort of irony between how much we have versus how grateful we are, and the whole mental health pandemic, and how many people are taking antidepressants and drugs for anxiety. But on the surface, we've made so much more progress, and we're so lucky. Yet there's still so much suffering, and it was kind of interesting interview he did.
Yeah. Yeah.
That was a bad note to end it on, wasn't it? But
But
Kirsten
we're
Lord,
grateful that things have
let's
progressed,
finish with
I
grateful.
guess.
Yes. Kirsten, thank you so much for joining me.
You're
Appreciate it.
welcome. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks, Steve.
Thank you.